Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Syria's government, as well as Russia, have been attacking what is a de-escalation zone in the Idlib countryside, specifically. Now, when it comes to Idlib, Russia and Syria would say that the presence of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or Tahrir al-Sham group, which previously was affiliated or is said to be affiliated with al-Qaeda at some level, is of concern, and that group has been attacking, in fact, Russian military base as well. Now, does that justify these attacks? What of the fact that this militant group is attacking Russia as well as Syrian interests within the country also? Is there blame on both sides for this situation, specifically when it comes to Idlib and otherwise? Let's discuss that a bit further. We're joined now by Hadi Wahab, who is a doctoral researcher and postgraduate teacher assistant at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. He is joining us now from the UK via Skype. We're also joined by Fawaz Tello, who is a Syrian opposition activist. He is also a researcher in strategic political issues for Syria. He is joining us now from Berlin on the line. And we're joined by Leon T. Goldsmith, who is an assistant professor of political science at Sultan Qaboos University. He's a Middle East and Syria specialist. He's also the author of Cycle of Fear, Syria's Alawites in War and Peace. He's joining us now from the Omani capital, Muscat. Leon, Fawaz, and Hadi, thank you all for joining us. And Hadi, if you can hear me, tell me about what you think about these attacks on Idlib. Are they justified because of the presence of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham?
First, let me say that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is not, it's not like it's a false accusation of being an offshoot of al-Qaeda, because al-Nusra is an offshoot of al-Qaeda. It is justified. It depends on what perspective. First, if you want to ask me personally, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is a terrorist group. Therefore, it is justified. And Idlib is protected by Turkey. And Turkey is a foreign country who has political ambitions in Syria, in Iraq, and in the Middle East. So it is a Syrian governorate, and it is the right for the Syrian army to recapture it. And add to that the areas the Syrian army are now trying to take back, are the highways of M4 and M5. It's included in the de-escalation zone in the Sochi Accord.
Yeah.
Therefore, the presence of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in these areas is not justified based on the Sochi Accord. Now, how further this offensive can go is not known yet. But at least now, for 15 and 20, or from 15 to 20 miles inside, this region is a de-escalation zone agreed upon by Iran, by Turkey, and by Russia, and by the Syrians.
Indeed. Okay, so let me put that question back to Fawaz, who I believe can hear me now. Fawaz, if you can hear me, tell me what your thoughts are about the Idlib operations by Syria and Russia. Are they justified because of Tahrir al-Sham's presence?
Actually, it's mainly a Russian operation, while the Syrian, what is called the Syrian army is not just a militia here and there. Militias coming not only by the Syrian, but also it's a militia by the Iraqi, by the Iranian, by the Lebanese. It's supported by the Iranian mainly based on sectarian code. So this operation actually was the end of what has been called the non-escalation agreement, which started before 3 years ago, 2.5 years, and which was all the time was a maneuver and a trick by the Russian to take the areas step by step. But now we are facing a dilemma, not only for the Russian but also for the Turkey, which was part of this agreement.
Yeah.
While because the Turkey actually had a main fear, a big fear about the flood of the refugees. This is the main thing which push Turkey now to.
So are you saying, Fawaz, if I may understand, just so I'm clear, that you're saying that the presence of Tahrir al-Sham should not be of concern?
It's not only Tahrir al-Sham. This is always accused. Al-Qaeda is, or whatever, the extremists is all it's the preferred excuse to do all the crimes under this mask. And this is actually what has been doing in Iraq. In Iraq, for example, for sectarian purpose, but Al-Qaeda was an excuse. Also in Idlib, yes, you have Tahrir al-Sham, which has been declared before many years that they are not loyal for Al-Qaeda, and they were trying to do some political movement. But also we have the most of the fighters who's fighting now is not Tahrir al-Sham. They are what is being called before the Free Syrian Army. Yeah. But the excuse for the Russians, for example, to say we are fighting Al-Qaeda. For example, before just 1 year in eastern suburb of Damascus, Tahrir al-Sham was not there at all. We are talking only about Free Syrian Army, but they were saying we are fighting Al-Qaeda. So this is an excuse. Everybody knows that. This is only
okay. So if you allow me then, Fawaz, I wanted to get Leon on this conversation as well. Leon, what are your thoughts about that? A lot of details, of course, but from the Russian point of view, they're saying that, listen, Tahrir al-Sham has been attacking other areas and also even the Russian base. Then does this justify those Idlib operations in what is supposed to have been a de-escalation zone?
Well, of course, what the Russians are saying is that the Turks haven't upheld their part of the Sochi bargain from September last year, and that they haven't been able to control the HTS fighters, who they became dominant from January this year within the enclave. So on that superficial pretext, yes, I mean, I think maybe we should go back to your original statement, which was, which side is to blame, or is there justification here? I think that there is one side who is not to blame, and that is the 3 million odd civilians who are basically stuck and with nowhere to go within this situation. So virtually they've got nowhere to go. They've tried to organise marches. The only thing that they know what to do is to protest and march to the Turkish border. But they were concerned that the Turks wouldn't receive them well. In fact, the Turks have dispatched commandos to the border. So really what we're talking about here is a large population of people in a dire, extreme circumstance. And there is no real justification for this, especially when we consider the bombings of hospitals, other civilian infrastructure in the enclave.
Okay, Hadi, what do you make of that? Because certain verses we know that there are civilians caught in the middle of all of this. How does one then deal with that situation properly, while of course taking into account the civilians, even if the Syrians and Russians were to claim that they are justified?
Waqar, there's no war in the world that happened without losing civilians, unfortunately. So if you look at the Americans in Afghanistan, if you look at their campaign against ISIS, a lot of civilians died, and even reports in the United States accused or tried to find out a solution how to avoid further civilian death.
On that point, though, Hadi, I mean, I want to be fair, of course, because we have criticized, though, the Americans for all of the above, as you've said. So why not then criticize the Syrians and Russians just as much?
No, I'm not criticizing anyone. I'm just describing what happens with everyone, because this is war. So I'm not saying that civilians are not dying. Of course, civilians are being killed in this zone, unfortunately. But this has more effects and further long-term and short-term effects, because first, this might cause another refugee crisis from Idlib to other regions in Turkey, and in the sea from Idlib, from Turkey to Europe, or by walking like it happened before. This might cause another refugee crisis, and this is a big problem. So mainly that's the main concern of everyone. Now, is there a solution? No, I don't think there's a solution, because Civilians will have to move out if their areas are being shelled. But this does not mean like that the Syrians or the Russians are targeting civilians, because you're putting civilians in areas where you have Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is a terrorist group, and they're being under attack. So I guess this is going to create another refugee crisis, and it's going to be a problem.
Fawaz, what are your thoughts about that? Because, certainly this situation, obviously, for the civilians who are caught in the middle of all of this. What solutions do you think lie ahead to be able to deal with that situation? Should, for example, as they have in the past been used, humanitarian corridors, should they be set up by the Syrian government or otherwise?
What kind of humanitarian corridor for where? The north was everybody was heading to the north, and now the north is under attack. And by the way, I don't disagree with what the previous speaker was talking. No, the hostages is the main hostages and the main target for the Russian and for the Assad militias. It's not Syrian army, Assad militias, and that is very clear. The claims of Russian, it's silly. Everybody now know that every Russian official is lying and impudently. So the civilian is the main hostage, which is used by the Russian to push the fighters to surround it. That's what the situation in all the area before. Especially in East Damascus before 1 year. The main problem for the fighters was that the civilian is the main target, and because of that they have to give up. But now they are surrounded, and the main target for all the air attack, which is random their attack, which with very stupid killing machines and missiles, is the civilian. Like you have said, the medical points, the hospitals, schools. It's a part of this dirty war, which we have used by the Russians since Afghanistan and Chechen and so on. So the main solution is a real ceasefire here. A real ceasefire, and this needs a real effort and by the Turkish and by the American mainly, because actually the American is the main player in all the game in the world, not only in Syria. And when they say stop, everything will be stopped. The Russians, they can't say. But,
so on that point of the ceasefire, though, on the point of the ceasefire, Fawaz, if you allow me, because it's an important point. Leon, if we're going to talk about a ceasefire, this zone, this area was already agreed to be a de-escalation zone by the three countries such as Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Now, one wonders about your thoughts about why that has actually fallen apart, if you think that it is actually HTS that has fallen apart because of or otherwise. And secondly, then, how do we know that any other ceasefire that is agreed upon will actually ever be respected by either side? Because I imagine also at some level, Leon, that we can't just let Idlib sit there, right? I mean, there has to be a resolution to that issue as well, considering it is part of sovereign Syrian territory.
Yes, well, of course. I mean, we have to look to the long history of failed ceasefires in the Syrian conflict. And also, I think more specifically to the original de-escalation agreements that were agreed in Istanbul in 2017. We had the 4 zones which were going to be de-escalated. So if we're going to be pessimistic and cynical about that, we can say, well, all of them bar 1 has now been reduced by the Syrian government, and that those periods of de-escalation was a pragmatic step to be able to manage their resources to take those with military force. So none of the ceasefires have been held, and none of them have been respected by either side. But we can see with the Idlib case the long history also of relocating the extremist elements from different reconciliation agreements with their weapons up into Idlib province, which of course has caused problems for the more moderate original Syrian revolutionaries. And in that area. And I think that the killing of Riyad Faris in November last year was symbolic of the final defeat of the Syrian original revolution. And Idlib was one, Kafr Nabu and these types of places were the birthplaces of the Syrian revolution. So what we're seeing now is the death throes of the revolution and the pretext, which has been partly manufactured by the regime and its allies, of using these extremist groups as a pretext and a justification to be able to finish off the job. And whatever collateral damage.
But to be fair, Leon, if I may for a moment just play devil's advocate here. I mean, if we're saying that yes, Syria may be using this as a pretext, i.e., the extremist groups, as you correctly pointed out, but at the same time, one could argue that listen, that should be an area of concern to everyone around the world, shouldn't it? That these extremist groups even exist in those areas. How does one then actually deal with that threat specifically?
Well, I think we have to look at the origins of this. I mean, the 2011 release of prisoners from Syrian prisons, extremists who went out and joined the revolution in various parts of the country, the long history of the Syrian Mukhabarat using jihadis against Iraq, against Lebanon. They hide behind the pretext of extremist threat whilst they simultaneously perpetuate that threat. And this has been well documented in many academic studies going back, not just through the period of the uprising, but the last 20 odd years of Syrian political strategy.
Okay.
All right, so Hadi, I wanted to get your thoughts on that then, because I find for me, myself, I would think that the extremist groups should be of concern. And what do you think about their background and who actually supports them? Is it about that really, or is it just now about the fact that these groups possibly can pose a threat, not only genuinely to Syria, but even possibly to neighboring countries?
First, I just wanted to disagree on one thing with Leon, that the Syrian army used such groups before in a different geopolitical framework. When they sent them to Iraq, the United States was there. It was an intuition for survival. So, and a realist perspective of things. So they had to do that. Even doesn't care if I agree or I disagree. Second, I guess it is a concern for everyone because, Waqar, let's be honest. First, what's going to happen? It's if not now, later. So Idlib is going to stay like this. These groups are going to stay like this, located in Idlib and backed by Turkey and in a buffer zone protected by Turkey. So what's going to happen afterwards? It's normal. It has to end somewhere. Unfortunately, you have no other solution, or it's going to stay like this, and the stalemate will endure in this status quo, or the Syrian army and the Russians will have to take the area. If not now, in 6 months. If not in 6 months, in 1 year or 2 years. It can't stay like this, because at the end, a deal is gonna work out between Russia, Turkey, the United States, Syria, Iraq on the Kurdish side, and on Idlib's side. And these terrorists will have to end up somewhere, or they're going to end up as refugees in Turkey and then in Europe, or they're going to end up dead in their fight with the regime. So they have no other escape. They're not going to be bargained on saving their lives. They're not like the Free Syrian Army, and you can bring them back to the Syrian army under one brigade or another. So you have no solution for that. It's going to happen either now or later. And the Syrian army, I guess, on the long run, they're going to take back Idlib, even if not now, because the Turkish will have their guarantees about a Kurdish state, and they're going to retreat from the area, and then the Syrian army and the Russians are going to end up taking Idlib. So what's going to happen with them? They have no other solution.
Okay, so let's leave it there as our final word. 4 o'clock has gotten the best of us, gentlemen, but of course we appreciate all of your time, your insight and expert analysis. Of course, on this issue, as Hadi, Leon, and Fawaz spoke about, viewers, one of the important things is that this situation in Idlib, as it stands right now, is a bit of a stalemate, or has been a stalemate, at least before the HTS or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham attacks began. them, of course, not respecting the ceasefire and the de-escalation zone. And then, of course, the argument on the other side as well is the same for the Syrian government and Russians, that they have not respected the de-escalation zone either. But then this entire situation when it comes to Idlib anyways cannot continue in the way it has so far. There needs to be a more permanent solution found at some point in time, and there doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon. You can't just have a buffer zone in another country and just say that's that. At some point in time, as Hadi said, the Syrian army will and would act anyways, wouldn't it, to take back what is seen as its own territory. What is its own territory? So we'll keep a very close eye on the situation in Idlib and, of course, throughout Syria here in Scope. I'll be back, though, after a short break with our next segment. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here at Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss the quote-unquote deal of the century put forth by the United States. Of course, the details of that have not yet been fully made public, but whatever has come out, it does make for uncomfortable reading, especially considering the opinions and the way that Jared Kushner, who's seen as the main architect of that deal, has been discussing things, saying that Palestinians may not be ready to govern themselves. That's one of his more latest statements. Does that mean, as pretty much as expected, that this deal will be more biased to the side of the Israelis? And then what does that mean for the Palestinian Authority and others who haven't even been brought into the fold about this deal to begin with? Let's discuss that all a bit further. We're joined now by Akram Al Sattari, who is head of the International Relations Department, the Sawa'id Association for Relief and Development. He's joining us now from Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip. We're also joined by Sami Hamdi, who is editor-in-chief of the International Interest, an online current affairs magazine. He's also a geopolitical risk advisor, and he's joining us now by Skype from London. Akram and Sami, thank you both for joining us. Sami, I'll start with you. What do you make of Kushner's statement about Palestinians, him not completely sure that Palestinians can even really govern themselves? With such a mindset, can one really come to a deal at this point?
I think it was very clear from the beginning that the deal of the century was designed to be more in favor of Israelis than the Palestinians. The Americans have always backed the Israeli position, and one of the only reasons in the past that they have been unable to really put significant pressure on the Palestinians.
Regardless of what anybody in the region or beyond may want, I imagine the Palestinians will not take this lying down?
The Palestinians won't take it lying down, but there is a very awkward dynamic that is in Palestine at this particular moment in time, and in particular in Gaza. Indeed, those who visit Gaza, those who see, will often report that there is now war fatigue. There is this view now that we are tired of war. We'd like 10, 15 years of rest, of peace, in order to be given a chance to build ourselves, and maybe this fighting is not bringing anywhere. This is why we have seen that Israel has intensified the bombing. Israel believes that we are bombing the will of resistance out of the Palestinians. We are bombing their desire to keep resisting, to take their land back. We are succeeding in pushing this out. This is one of the reasons why Jared Kushner is now seeing that perhaps maybe he may actually be able to convince some Palestinians that peace is better than this current situation that they're in right now. For me, of course, if you're asking my opinion, this is a disastrous mentality. Indeed, in Palestine, there are many who still want to resist. There are many who believe their land was stolen. There are many who believe that it is important to keep fighting in order to restore justice, irrespective of what the world says. However, we have to remember that these kind of ideas do not come from a vacuum. Jared Kushner is seeing that some in Palestine are saying that maybe resistance, we need a break from it. This is a very dangerous idea, and this is what Israel is trying to capitalize on, and indeed Jared Kushner.
And, another thing, Sami, that Jared Kushner keeps talking about, and he keeps talking about the economy and how the economic situation for Palestinians needs to improve drastically. Can you just throw money at this problem and expect it to go away?
I think it's a very hypocritical statement. The economic situation is because of Israeli blockade and Egypt's blockade, of course, on the Rafah border, and also because Israel keeps taking land. It takes land by land by land and keeps settling, and then it keeps crying that we want a two-state solution, when in reality Israel has no interest in a two-state solution. Indeed, even the Palestinians are saying, look, we don't want this. The Palestinians are saying we want a one-state solution. We want to be part of one state altogether. But as Bernie Sanders once said in an interview with Al Jazeera, if we do a one-state solution, then the Arabs will be a majority. Then it's as if it is defeating Israel. So we have to understand that this umbrella of the two-state solution, the way that Israel operates under this umbrella of the two-state solution, that is causing the economic crisis. You can't throw money at the issue because money is not the problem here. The problem is a blockade The problem is illegal occupation, and the problem is a world that is saying to the Palestinians, forget your land, forget your rights, accept that Israel is there, accept your land was stolen, lie down, accept it, and if you accept it, we'll give you a couple of $2 billion in order to improve that little piece of land that we left you with. This is the reality. It is an injustice, whichever way you look at it. And Jared Kushner's deal of the century is how to cement this injustice and make sure nobody brings up the topic ever again. This is the reality. With the Palestine-Israel issue, we are dancing around the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is this is theft of land. This is illegal occupation. The US and indeed the Western powers are trying to legitimize it by in form of a deal, in the form of a two-state solution. The Palestinians are saying, my land was stolen, I want to fight for it. People are saying, if you fight for it, you're a terrorist. You have to stay and you have to accept what we tell you to do. This is the real crux of the dilemma. This is why we cannot find a successful solution to this issue until today.
Tell us whether you think, Akram, that just improving the economic situation of yourself or other Palestinians will drastically change things, as Jared Kushner keeps saying.
As to this center of the deal and the way things are being developed now and the way things are evolving, I think that this is far deeper than just a temporary strategy that is trying to calm down the situation in the Palestinian territory. That is a mere reflection of the right-wing perception of the Palestinian, what they call Palestinian-Israeli cause, Palestinian-Israeli conflict. They want to bring an end to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict without having to pay the needed political price for that. So the Israeli and the Israeli right wing believe in what they call the economic peace, and the Jared Kushner has already drafted his strategy. I would not be surprised if that was a strategy that was already drafted by Netanyahu and given to Jared Kushner so that he would promote it among Arabs. Netanyahu, Lieberman, and all the right-wing powers that are controlling what they call Israel now believe in the economic peace and believe that there is no political right whatsoever for the Palestinians, and believe that Palestinians should be given access to job opportunities, should be given access to natural resources, should be given access to cash and different things, but they should not think at all of Palestine as a political entity, Palestine as a state that they aspire and want to see established. This strategy has been followed, and now Jared Kushner is starting a unilateral step. This century of the deal, this deal of the century, is now one unilateral step that is taken by the American and the Israelis without any agreement from Europe. And what they are just trying to do is to dictate a new reality on the Palestinians and to make them accept. Now, popularly, the Palestinians are not accepting, but regionally, the Arab powers, the new emerging powers, are cementing, just like what said by my colleague, cementing that initiative, but I don't see it succeeding.
Okay, so we're going to add another voice to this conversation, joined by Ayman Mhanna as well. He's the executive director of the Samir Kassir Foundation. He's joining us now from the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Ayman, always a pleasure to have you here on Scope. Ayman, tell us about what your thoughts about the deal of the century are right now. Jared Kushner, of course, saying the Palestinians probably can't govern themselves. At least he's implied that. And then, of course, there are concerns about whether you can just throw money at this problem and expect it to solve itself.
To call any proposal a deal, you need two parties. From the very first moment we heard about this deal, there was only one party to the deal, the Israeli party, of course, with a plan submitted by Jared Kushner and the US. At no point was there any serious, even beginning of an acceptance by the Palestinians of the deal. Probably the Americans thought that Arab powers, mainly in the Gulf, that are currently opposed to Iran might, as a part of a greater bargain, of a greater deal, influence the Palestinians and put pressure on the Palestinians to agree to what has been presented. It's a question of a fair deal, giving the Palestinians back their right to their land, to their security, and at the same time something that strengthens the Palestinian institutions so that a democratic state of Palestine can truly prosper. A Palestine that is under occupation, that is under blockade economically, cannot prosper democratically, and it will be the fertile ground for more radicalization, for more poverty and more frustration.
Indeed. And Sami, on that point about democracy within Palestine and even just Palestinian statehood overall, in whatever shape it were to come into form, because if you look at the map right now, it's very hard to see with the way that Israel has continually expanded. It's very hard to see where a Palestine, as we would understand it, can really exist as a state. What do you make of that, and how much of a challenge is that then going forward?
In other words, democracy is only acceptable insofar as the people vote in accordance with their desires. If we follow this line, democracy will be acceptable in Palestine insofar as they vote for a party that is willing to let go of some of these Palestinian rights to the land. That as long as they are willing to vote for a party that is happy to sit down and negotiate with the Israelis and perhaps even adopt some parts of Jared Kushner's deal of the century. You've highlighted the central problem to this issue, which is that when you look at the map, where would the Palestinian state exist? The reason why is because you're looking for a Palestinian state without realizing, or rather you realize, but the viewer doesn't realize that where he sees Israel, this is Palestine. Where he sees Israel on that map, this is all land that was taken from the Palestinians. This was all land that the Israelis dominated, where they kicked out the Palestinian people. They forced them into a corner with international backing. The reality of the situation is this: if you accept that you are trying to make an injustice legal, then you can understand why everybody's after a two-state solution. People stole land, and now you're trying to find some sort of legal way to say, okay, we forgive you for stealing the land, you can keep the land, and we'll find some way for the former owners to live somewhere else. If you, however, you believe in morals, you believe in justice, you believe in true democratic values, you believe in liberal values, you will say there should be one state. People should be entitled to their land.
We're going to go into a short break anyways, or we're going to say goodbye to Sami Hamdi anyways because he had to leave us earlier. We're going to ask Akram and Ayman to stay with us. We're going to continue this conversation after this break, viewers. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us, viewers. We continue to discuss this deal of the century as presented by the U.S. to resolve what they're seeing as the Israel-Palestine issue. We're still joined by Ayman Mhanna and Akram Al Sattari. Akram, I wanted to start with you in this segment and ask you, as I had put to Sami earlier, about the map. When you look at it right now and the territories that at this point in time are controlled by Israel and those that are within the hands of Palestinians, it's very hard to see how, in the eyes of the Americans or anybody really else around the world who supports a two-state solution, how there can really be two states. What do you make of that?
Well, as I have told you, Americans are planning to give the Palestinians cash and job opportunities and to make them forget the major and trying political cause that they have been fighting for the past decades. As a matter of fact, Jared Kushner himself said that Palestinians might be frustrated about the deal of the century because there are two good things in that deal of the century and there are other 9 bad things about that. One of the bad things that you would really understand without having to dig into the details of that detailed plan for the Palestinians is that it does not recognize the right of Palestinians to have a state. And even if there is a state, that state would be without arms, and that state would be only in some around 19 to 22% of the entire Palestine land. There is no political core or foundation for that deal of the century. There is no map at all. The only map that you might be shocked to look into the maps that the far wing Jewish activists are distributing now. In that map, there is no such a thing that is called Al-Quds, Jerusalem. In that map, there is no such a thing that is called the West Bank. In that map, there is only Gaza, and Gaza is being subjected to attacks from all different sides, including some Arab regional powers and including the Israelis and the Americans. So the map that they want to promote is actually a map that promotes the sovereignty of Israel over the land of Palestine as part of the belief and the proficiency that this is a promised land that is given to them.
Right.
They're using religion, they're using the dictates of Torah and Gospel to make sure that they convince the politicians that the land of Palestine is no longer the land of Palestine, it's the Israel, and they are acting accordingly with the help of a new powers in the region, in the Arab political system.
Indeed. And Ayman, I wanted to ask you then about that same situation. If we're looking at the map, not only do we see that, as Akram there has correctly said, as well as Sami, about what those implications are about Israeli control over what territory at this point in time. But then now we have, snap elections that have been announced for Israel as well. We already had a right-wing government, an extreme right-wing government, and now we'll probably have an even more extreme right-wing government. This is a situation which genuinely feels like a stalemate, doesn't it? How then does one move forward? Because even such a right-wing government, I imagine, would have a hard time signing on to even a deal like Jared Kushner's, wouldn't it?
Look, I feel we're still talking about a deal that is almost defunct. Mike Pompeo's comments that were relayed in the Washington Post show that large segments of the US administration does not believe that this deal is still actually on the table. It's a communication platform in order to promote Jared Kushner, in order to give some support to the Netanyahu government and specifically to Benjamin Netanyahu as a person. But there is no deal. There is a situation of occupation. There is a situation of a territory that is completely plagued with settlements. At the same time, there is the situation of a country, of a population that is Palestine, that is turning into a battleground, a proxy battleground for all forces in the region. The Israeli occupation, of course, the Americans wanting a diplomatic success somewhere, because so far it hasn't been that stellar on that front, but also the Gulf monarchies as well as Iran. There is not any single player in the region that is not using the Palestinian people and abusing the Palestinian people to achieve interests and to achieve gains that have nothing to do with a fair solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And a peace deal cannot be fair if it's not comprehensive. Thinking about the situation only from the prism of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict without taking into account what is happening with the Palestinian refugees in neighboring countries cannot be a sustainable deal. It cannot be a sustainable deal if the issue of boundaries with Lebanon, with Syria, are not settled according to international law. So any attempt to look at the Palestinian, at the deal of the century as only something related to a division of territory and sovereignty inside the land of Palestine is one shooting itself in the foot because it's not working. And at the same time, it's so short-sighted because it ignores so many other ramifications to the conflict.
Okay, so then Akram, when we're talking about the internal Palestinian issues, if I may for a moment, we also have this division right now within Palestinian politicians also. How much of a factor do you think that plays out into all of this as well? Because the Palestinian Authority, seemingly at least, is weakened anyhow, isn't it, in how it's perceived on the Palestinian street?
Well, yes, the Palestinian Authority is weakened because the Palestinian Authority has committed itself to the full observance of the agreements that were signed with the Israeli side and that were not respected by Israel and are still being respected by the Palestinian Authority, including and most notably the security obligations that the President of the Palestinian Authority keeps underlining every time he's speaking to the media. Security coordination, security liaison without no political agreement or without no political achievement whatsoever. As a matter of fact, we have been living under siege and we have been living in the status of war for the past 19 years since 2000, eruption of al-Intifada al-Aqsa in 2000. And as a matter of fact, Israel did not respect any agreement whatsoever, while the Palestinian Authority is still with a great attention and with a meticulous understanding is fulfilling every agreement that was signed with the Israelis. And because of that, and some other commitments, the Palestinian Authority, as a result of those commitments, also did not respect the result of the elections in 2006. And that was the seed that brought about the entire division that we are living now. The Palestinian Authority does not seem to be willing to reconsider its position when it comes to political life and political participation and peaceful transition of authorities and of power. And because of that, we are living that state of division, and that all plays in hand for the Israelis who are swallowing the land and who are all the time invading the territories of the West Bank of Gaza, and also arresting and killing people and keeping some even Palestinian Legislative Council members in the Israeli jails without no political action taken by the Palestinian authorities or by the Arabs at large. So we understand that division has been weighing down Palestinians And division might lead eventually to the demise of the Palestinian Authority without achieving anything whatsoever on the political arena for the Palestinians and for the cause at large.
All right, so then, Ayman, if you for a moment play devil's advocate, because they will obviously, if this and when this falls apart, publicly at least, or when it's called a failure by the U.S. administration or even the Israelis, this deal of the century that is I'm referring to, the blame will, at least in the Western narrative, fall on the shoulders of the Palestinians, won't it? As it has in the past as well. And the narrative will always be that the Palestinians are not willing to compromise, and that for a deal to go through, there will have to be compromises on both sides. How would you respond to that? Should the Palestinians be willing to compromise even more?
Nothing new under the sun. As you mentioned, it's not the first time that the Palestinians are blamed for the failure of negotiations unfairly, dating back to the late 1990s with Taba, the negotiations between Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak at the time. So it's not new. The full focus should be on a fair deal that looks at the situation from a comprehensive regional perspective. And the Palestinians deserve better. My fellow speaker mentioned the lack of legitimacy of the Palestinian authorities, rightly so, in terms of internal division, in terms of how commitments were made that do not reflect the will of the people. But the Palestinians deserve better at large. In Gaza, Hamas is also persecuting journalists. As a press freedom organization, we know how many journalists are being targeted by Hamas and by the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. Rule of law does not exist on internal issues related to corruption, related to service provisions. Of course, we should blame the occupation, but the occupation is not the only one to blame. It is time for the Palestinian people to be provided the right support for the emergence of truly representative, democratic, respectful of rule of law organizations inside Palestine who will be the best negotiators on behalf of the entire Palestinian people, because it's the interest of the Palestinian people that will be first instead of the interest of Hamas and its foreign backers and the Palestinian Authority and its foreign backers. It's time for the Palestinian people to get the leadership they deserve in order to be able to resist effectively against all forms of unfair deals that are presented to them.
Akram, I wanted your thoughts on what Ayman there just said, because I remember going back to when Hamas won the elections and the Israelis and the Americans essentially rejected that, and that's why we still have Mahmoud Abbas as president of the Palestinian Authority, and there's no elections, to the best of my knowledge, on the horizon at this point in time, at least, and that unity deal and all that has seemingly just fallen apart. What do you make of that, Akram?
Well, what I make of that is that we are followers. All the political regimes in the region are followers of the American. I wouldn't say followers, I would say puppets. I would say stooges for the Americans and for all the superpowers. So we have no independent Palestinian or Arab political stand. Because of that, you see them fluctuating between the position to name Iran as the first enemy of the Arab Ummah and then not doing anything to Israel. Although Iran was established, Iran, the state that we know as the Islamic Republic of Iran, was established in 1979, while Israel was established before, long back in 1948. They have done nothing to that cause. And also in the 80s, they declared what they call jihad against the Russians in Afghanistan, while Palestine was still occupied by the Israelis. And then after that, they come with this term of terrorism and extremism and fanaticism and all of those things while they have not done anything to Iran. Bottom line, we are following the footsteps of the Americans, whatever they do, and because of that, they are mocking our political leadership, and they are deciding whatever they want to do, and they are realizing whatever they wanted to do. And the greatest manifestation of that they relocated their embassy from Tel Aviv to Al-Quds, Jerusalem, and all the Arab leaders have done nothing. Yeah. They are only worried about Iran while they have not done anything to Israel. And they say now that they are closer to Israel than any time before because of the Iranian threat. And they are bringing misery and destruction to the Arab nation, Arab Ummah, and to their religion and to their political causes. And they are not going to achieve anything. And they are going to lose big time because the Arab Spring is going to continue sometime soon, I assume, and they're going to lose their power and their authority. That's what I assume is going to happen.
Ayman, I'm going to give you the final word then. I have about a minute and a half left. I'm wondering, Ayman, this can be quite an explosive situation, can't it? Because I imagine that if you force something onto the Palestinian peoples, and especially, of course, on the issue of Al-Quds, Jerusalem, that's sensitive areas, aren't they? And if a solution is forced onto Palestinian people, I'm talking about not just the Palestinian Authority, this could all explode into violence, couldn't it?
I'm extremely worried, of course, of the potential impact of forcing anything on the Palestinian people, but I do trust that the Palestinian people won't accept it. And at the same time, I am still probably here on the more optimistic side, thinking that this deal is quasi-dead. Just the idea that it will be forced upon, you need people to do it. Who are these people? Even the mightiest Arab leaders who might be sympathetic to the deal cannot do it, are not strong enough to do it. But just one point, we've been blaming the United States forever for every woe in the Arab world. It's also true, but it's also time for us to take our responsibilities and also find the reasons for our failures from within. The failures do exist within our leadership, whether it's imposed, supported by the US or not, and also in our elites that cannot necessarily look at the imperative of creating strong local institutions focusing on true democracy, rule of law, independence of justice before blaming the others. Let's do our homework from within, and then we'll blame the others, and this way we'll be much stronger negotiators.
Very well. We'll leave there as our final word. But Ayman and Akram, we of course appreciate your time and insight. And of course, we appreciate Sami as well, who was speaking to us in the first half of this discussion. Now, viewers, as all of our guests have spoken about, this deal is essentially dead before it's even really arrived. And this is the story, hasn't it? This has been the story, really, hasn't it? From all U.S. deals that have ever been put on the table in the past. So we can even talk about Oslo, really, and how that went through, but didn't really ever go through. At least when it came to the Israelis respecting that deal. That is, of course, the Palestinian argument to that. So where does all of this end up with a divided Palestinian leadership at this time, divided Palestinian politicians? They're not even involved as part of this deal, but then, of course, that all weakens their hand anyhow. And then there's perceived threat from Iran, which is being prioritized by everybody at this point in time, versus giving the Palestinians a fair deal or justice or accountability for being kicked out of their respective lands and homes. We'll keep a close eye on that situation here in Scope, but I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.